This video will show you how to add a chart to your dashboard. To add a chart to your dashboard, first drag the chart component from the toolbox into the dashboard canvas on the right. You can resize the chart component by clicking on the chart and dragging the borders of the chart, or dragging the move handles of the chart component. You can move the chart by clicking on the move handle and dragging the entire chart. To add data to a chart, press the Edit button in the middle of the chart or press the Edit button at the top right. This opens the chart editor. Expand the data source in the top left panel and note that the fields are grouped as dimensions and measures. Typically, dimensions are the fields that you will use on the chart to perform grouping, while measures are the fields that you will use on the chart to perform aggregation. Generally, measures are numerical fields, and dimensions are either date fields or categorical or string fields. If there is a field that is listed as a dimension that you want to use as a measure, you can right-click the field and select Convert to Measure. Likewise, if there is a field that is listed as a measure that you want to use as a dimension, you can right-click on the field name and select Convert to Dimension. In this case, we'd like to group the data on the chart by state, so we will use the state field as our first dimension. Drag the state field to the X region in the chart editor. This adds the state values on the X-axis of the chart. For each of these state groups, we would like to plot the summed total. So we'll find the total measure and drag the total measure to the Y-axis in the chart editor. The chart now gives us the summed total for each state group. We can continue to add additional dimensions and measures to make a more complex chart. Let's add the region dimension also on the X-axis, and let's add the quantity purchased measure to the Y-axis. We now have 2 dimensions and 2 measures. Note that the grouping of the dimensions is not exactly right. For each state, we have the regions in the state, which turns out to be just a single region. What would make more sense here would be to group by region and then break out the states within the region. We can do this by simply swapping the region and state fields in the X-axis. Click and drag on the region field and move it to the left of the state field. This is a more sensible grouping that displays the states within each region. Note that our 2 measures are displayed on 2 different axes. We have the sum totals at the top and the summed quantity purchased at the bottom. In some cases, you will want to plot your different measures on a single axis. To do this, you can press the Switch to Single Graph button in the bottom left panel. The 2 measures are now plotted against a single axis. However, because of the great difference in the magnitude of the values, the quantity purchased values are not visible on the chart. Here, we can either choose to return to our original display, which had the different measures on different axes, or we can display the quantity purchased on the right side axis. Let's try that approach. To do that, press the Edit Measure button next to the quantity purchased field in the Y region, and select Secondary Axis. Then press the Apply button. The quantity purchased aggregates are now displayed against the right side axis, while the total aggregates are displayed against the original left side axis. In addition to putting dimensions and measures into the X and Y regions to display them against the X and Y axes, you can also place dimensions and measures into one of the visual areas, color, shape, size, or text, in the bottom left panel. For example, instead of displaying the summed quantity purchased against an axis, you could choose to represent the summed quantity purchased by using the shape of the fill. To do this, drag the field to the shape region. The aggregated quantity purchased is now represented on the chart by the density of the fill in the bar, and the legend provides the code for understanding the graphical representation. Likewise, if we wanted to display a dimension using one of the visual properties in the bottom left panel, we could drag a dimension field to one of those areas. For example, if we wanted to represent the date field by using color, we could simply drag the date dimension to the color region in the bottom left panel. The individual year groupings are now represented by different colors on the chart. You can continue in this manner to add additional dimensions and additional measures either to the X and Y regions in the chart editor or to any of the visual areas, color, shape, size, or text, in the chart editor. To change the chart type, press the Select Chart Style button in the bottom left panel. This allows you to select from a large number of different chart types. In this case, we'll switch the chart to a point type chart. Select the desired chart type and press the Apply button. Note that for a point type chart, the shape binding relates to the level of the fill in the point and not to the pattern of the fill, as it did for a bar chart. Rather than representing the summed quantity purchased using that level of fill or shape, we might consider representing the quantity purchased by using the size of the point. To do that, simply drag the quantity purchased field from the shape region to the size region. The size of the point now provides the aggregated quantity purchased, and again, the legend provides the code for understanding the graphical representation. Note that if you move over a point on the chart, the tooltip provides all of the information about that particular data group. Let's leave the chart editor for a moment by pressing the Finish Editing button and return to the dashboard view. Note that if the chart component is fairly small, you may observe a scroll bar on the chart. The scroll bar allows you to see the entirety of the chart by scrolling back and forth. For very complex charts, particularly with many dimensions, the scroll bar may be the only way to see the entire chart. For a chart like the one that we've created here, though, we can easily make the chart component big enough to display without the scroll bar. Another approach you might take to provide more room for the chart to display is to move the legends to a different location. You can do this by simply clicking and dragging on the legends. In this case, we've moved the legend below the chart to give the chart additional width. Let's now return to the chart editor by pressing the Edit button at the top right of the chart. Let's return to a simpler version of this chart that simply displays the state total and quantity purchased. You can remove fields by simply dragging them from the editor back into the data source panel at the top left. To display values on the points, you can either use the text region at the bottom left, or you can use the Show Values property. To use the Show Values property, right-click on the chart and select Plot Properties, and enable the Show Values property. Then press OK. The sum totals are now displayed above each of the points. Another approach to displaying these values is to drag the total field to the text region in the bottom left panel. This is also useful to display the values of other fields on the points. Drag the state field from the dimensions folder to the text region in the bottom panel. This will display the state names above each of the points. To format values on a chart, select the text that you want to format by clicking on it, and then select the Format tab in the left panel. In the Format tab, find the properties that you want to modify and make the desired format changes. You can format other text on the chart in the same way. For example, to format the text on a chart axis, select the chart axis, again click on the Format tab in the left panel, and then make the desired formatting changes. There are a variety of different properties that you can set for dimensions and measures. To access these properties for a dimension, press the Edit Dimension button next to the desired dimension. The Sort property allows you to change the sort order for the dimension values. Ascending and descending generally refer to alphabetical or reverse alphabetical ordering. The by value properties will sort the dimension values according to a measure that you select. For example, if we wanted to arrange the state values according to their summed totals for each state, we would select by value descending and then choose the total aggregate as the sorting measure. If we wanted to preserve in the chart only the top or bottom so many dimension values according to a measure, we can do this as well. Again, press the Edit Dimension button, and from the Rank menu, select either top or bottom, and then choose the number of groups that you want to retain in the chart. For example, we might want the top 7 states according to the summed total. These are the top 7 states according to the sum total in descending order by value. To change the properties of a measure, press the Edit Measure button next to the desired measure. Here you can change the aggregation method. This is the method by which a set of points is aggregated to a single representative value. For example, by summing those points, by averaging those points, or by taking the max and min, etc. And you can also choose a method of representing that aggregate on the chart. In some cases, you may want to represent just the raw aggregate, in which case none is the appropriate choice here. But in other cases, you may want to represent the aggregate as a percentage of a grand total, or a percentage of a subtotal, perhaps a running total, or any of these other methods of representation. If you are using a dimension in one of the color regions in the bottom left panel, for example, if we were representing date by using color, we could change the displayed colors by pressing the Edit Color button. This allows us to choose the order in which the colors are applied to the different groups on the chart. You can select from different palettes of colors as well. Click the Select Palette button and choose from one of the predefined palettes. Then press Apply when you're finished. If you are using one of the visual displays for a measure, here too you can press the Edit button to the left side of the measure to change the properties of the display. For example, for a size representation, you can set the smallest size and the largest size. Whereas for a color representation of a measure, you can click the Edit Color button to choose the spectrum that's used to display the measure. Of course, you can feel free to use multiple modalities of displaying any dimension or measure. For example, we might consider displaying the summed quantity purchased both using a color representation and using a size representation. Finally, in some cases you may want to represent a dimension or measure without changing the graphical appearance of the chart. To do this, use the Break By region for a dimension or the Tooltip region for a measure. For example, if we wanted to represent the date on the chart without using a separate axis or one of the visual regions, we could add the date field into the Break By region. This would break out the date without introducing any additional chart representations. Note that you can change the level of grouping for a date field, whether it's used in the Break By region or on an axis or as a visual representation, by pressing the Edit Dimension button next to the date field and choosing the desired date grouping level. If we placed a measure into this area, for example, discount, this would not change the appearance of the chart, but it would add the aggregated measure into the tooltip. So the tooltip now displays, in addition to the aggregates that are displayed on the chart, also the aggregated discount, which is not displayed on the chart. Note that you can change the way that the tooltip is displayed. To do this, right-click on the chart and select Properties. Then press the Customize button next to the tooltip property, select the Custom option, and create a custom tooltip. Please see the documentation for the custom tooltip syntax. Press Finish Editing to complete the chart editor. You've now seen all the basics of creating a chart in a dashboard. Next, we'll look at a couple of special chart types that might be valuable to you. One of the common types of charts that you'll probably need to create is a pie chart. To create a pie chart, first add a chart component into the dashboard canvas, resize as necessary, and then press the Edit button in the middle of the chart or at the top right. To create a pie chart, first add the measure, usually to the y-axis. In this case, we'll use the measure total. The aggregated measure determines the size of the slices in the pie. So drag the total field to the Y region in the chart editor. To change the default bar type chart to a pie type chart, press the Select Chart Style button in the bottom left panel, and then choose one of the two types of pie charts, either pie or 3D pie. You can double-click or press the Apply button at the top right of the panel. The next thing we'll do is select the field that will define the groups on the pie chart. In this case, we'll use the category dimension. Typically, for a pie chart, the dimension will be represented either by color, shape, or size. Let's distinguish the different categories by color. Drag the category field to the color region in the bottom left panel. The legend on the right side indicates the colors that are assigned to the different categories. To use the shape of the fill instead of the color to distinguish the categories, simply place the category field in the shape region. To use the size of the slices, place the category field in the size region. In most cases for a pie chart, you don't need the y-axis title, so right-click on that title and select Hide Title. As we saw earlier, there are a couple of ways to add values to a chart. You can either use the text region in the bottom left panel, or you can use the Show Values property in the Plot Properties dialog box. Let's use the Show Values property to put some values on the pie chart. Right-click on the chart, select Plot Properties, and then enable Show Values. This displays the aggregated values represented by each slice of the pie on the corresponding slice. In many cases for a pie chart, you may want to display the values as a % of grand total, because this is essentially what the pie chart is meant to represent, the contributions of each group to the entirety of the chart. To do this, press the Edit Measure button next to your measure, and in the Trend and Comparison menu, select % of grand total. Then press Apply. You can format these percentages as we saw earlier by clicking on any one of those % values, selecting the Format tab in the left panel, and then assigning the desired format. If you want to represent these percentage values with greater precision, you can assign a numerical format and then specify the number of decimal places that you want. To do this, again, select any of the values, select the Format tab in the left panel, and then scroll down to the Format menu. From the Format menu, select Number. Then select a custom number format. There are a number of presets that you can choose from, or you can define your own by entering the appropriate symbols. See the documentation for more information about the symbols that you can use in a custom number format. In this case, the preset ##.00% would be appropriate if we wanted 2 decimal places to the right of the decimal point. The percent symbol used in the format will ensure that the value is represented as a percent. Press Apply to apply the new format. To change the colors used on the pie chart, simply press the Edit Color button next to the color region, and then click on the color chip to change any of the existing colors to a different color. You can also swap in a different palette by pressing the Select Palette button. Once you've made your color selections, press the Apply button to assign the new colors. Finally, in some cases you may want to introduce a little bit of space between the slices on the pie chart to make it easier to read. To do this, you can right-click on the pie chart, select Plot Properties, and then choose the Explode Pie option. Press OK to introduce the space between the slices. Once you've completed the pie chart, you can press Finish Editing to return to the dashboard view. Another common kind of chart is a bubble chart. A bubble chart is a point type chart similar to what we saw earlier, where the size of the points is used to represent a measure. Let's take a look at a few other aspects of creating a bubble chart. First, we'll add a chart component to the dashboard canvas. Open the chart editor, and create a point type chart. To do this, from the Select Chart Style button, choose a point type chart. From our data source, we'll choose as the dimension the company and place this on the x-axis of the chart. And we'll choose to aggregate the totals for each company. So from the Measures folder, find the total measure and add that to the Y region in the chart editor. This is a basic point type chart. To make it into a bubble chart, we'll simply associate a measure with the size of the points. Let's drag the quantity purchased to the size region in the bottom left panel. Each point is now sized according to the aggregated quantity purchased. As we saw earlier, you can add additional measures into the chart. For example, we could represent the average discount by using the shape of the fill within each point. Drag the discount field to the shape region. Then change the aggregation method for the discount to average. Press the Edit Measure button and select Average as the aggregate. Of course, you could also use color to represent the average discount. You can also put a dimension in the color region. For example, let's add the region dimension into the color region in the chart editor. This chart now has 2 dimensions and 3 measures. We can add yet another dimension, for example the date field, by adding this to one of the axes. For example, we might consider adding the date field to the y-axis. We now have a distinct bubble chart for each of the 4 years from 2017 to 2020. You can proceed in this manner by adding additional dimensions to the x and y axes to create a grid of charts. If instead you choose to have a measure on the x and the y axes, then what you will have instead is a scatter plot. Consider the case where we represent the company by using color, and we represent the quantity measure on the x-axis. Here we'll remove the date field and remove the other measures from the shape and size regions. Note here that the quantity purchased is not currently being aggregated, so press the Edit Measure button and let's switch the aggregate setting to Sum. This produces a scatter plot that provides the total and quantity aggregates for each company. Here again, we can add back in some other measures by using the shape or size regions in the bottom left panel. For example, we can still represent the average discount using shape. And if we wish, we can represent yet another measure using size. For example, the paid measure. Then again, we can add in additional dimensions. For example, we could consider adding the region dimension. This will break out the data by region, USA East and USA West. And we can again consider breaking out the data by date. We'll break out the dates on the y-axis again. Note that this chart has become fairly complicated, but we do have the legend to help us distinguish the different dimensions and measures, and we also have the tooltip for each point, which will provide all of the details for each individual group represented on the chart. When the chart is complete, you can press Finish Editing to leave the editor and return to the dashboard view. Finally, let's look at a couple of common features that you may want to add to any chart. These include trend lines and target lines. A trend line is a mathematical model that you can add to a chart to explain the variance in the data. For example, a linear trend line tries to explain the variance in the data by using a straight line, whereas a quadratic trend line tries to explain the variance in the data by using a quadratic curve. To add a trend line to a chart, right-click on the chart, either in the dashboard view or in the chart editor, and select Plot Properties. From the Trend Line menu, select the desired model that you want to fit to the data. In this case, we'll select a quadratic model. Typically, if you have different groups of data on the chart, for example in this chart, we have the data grouped by company using color, you will want to enable the one per color option. This will produce one trend line for each group. Press OK to apply the trend lines. Note that each company represented on the chart has its own trend line. Note that the trend lines represented on the chart will update as you make filtering selections. You can also project a trend line into the future. To do this, in the Project Forward field, select the number of time units that you want to project into the future. The units represent the date groupings on the chart, so in this case it would be quarters. If we wanted to project the trend lines 4 quarters into the future, we would enter 4. The chart now extends each trend line 4 quarters into the future. Let's remove these trend lines. Another common feature is target lines. Target lines allow you to plot lines on the chart that either represent fixed values or particular values in the data, such as minima or maxima, or more advanced concepts such as standard deviations and confidence intervals. To add target lines to a chart, right-click on the chart and select Properties. Select the Advanced tab in the Chart Properties dialog box, and in the Target Lines area, press the Add button. Note that there are 3 different kinds of target lines: line, band, and statistics. The Line tab allows you to plot a single line on the chart. For example, as the field we can select the measure, sum total, and as the value we can either enter a fixed value or choose some representative value such as the average. We can specify a label. The label can be arbitrary, or it can be the value of the target line, the formula, such as average, or the field name. And we can select properties such as the line style and the fill above and below the line. Press OK to create the target line. This target line represents the average of the data, displays the value of that average, and includes a fill above and below the target line. To set more advanced target lines, return to the Properties dialog box. Let's delete the existing target line and add a target band. Select the Band tab, select a field, and then specify the upper and lower target lines that make up the band. For example, our target band might go from the average value to the maximum value. Again, we can set labels, specify line styles, and specify a fill for the band, that's the area between the two target lines, as well as above and below. Finally, you can set lines for particular statistical features of the chart. Again, let's return to the Properties dialog box for the chart, delete the existing target band, press the Add button, and now select the Statistics tab. These are more advanced concepts such as confidence intervals, percentages, percentiles, quantiles, and standard deviations. Please see the documentation for a description of these different statistical concepts and how they apply to charts. In this case, let's simply select standard deviation. We'll leave the label as its default target value, and then create a fill for the band, as well as above and below. Here we've plotted lines corresponding to one standard deviation above and one standard deviation below the mean.